Mute. Not yet. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Those of you who are on, if you want to go ahead and click on your profile picture, there's 3 little dots and there's an option to rename. If you want to put your organization behind your name, that might kind of help Kelly if you have questions and things while you're asking along.
Great.
I am without a camera at the moment, but I have a new one and I'm trying to get it to load. So we'll see what happens here.
Not a problem.
I'm not just trying to hide. I had a camera death.
Not a problem at all. All right, guys, it's 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Kelly has so much information for you today, so I'm going to keep my introduction brief here. Just want to welcome you to our second session in this 2022 year. Just a reminder that this is being recorded, so you can share it with your board, you can share it with other coworkers, and you'll get the slides and everything again after the meeting with the recording along with it. Additionally, you'll get a survey. If you could help us a lot with our future trainings, if you could fill that out. If you're a person who registered multiple individuals when you did your sign up, if you could forward that survey on to them, it would help us a lot so we can get a full diverse picture of everyone's reactions to the session today. I'm going to be monitoring the chat box during this, so feel free to ask questions through there. Kelly has also said that if you'd like to just raise your hand and interrupt, she's fine with that way. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share some ideas with you about community program evaluation. I want to start with a thank you to all of you for putting your heart and your soul and your time and your passion into the work that you do in your communities. And I have had opportunities to do the same as a nonprofit executive director, also as a consultant, and then now training students to do the same as they go out into the world as nonprofit practitioners, as well as volunteers and board members. And so I want to thank you for what you do and connect what you do to what I'm going to share today. And that is program evaluation and answering the question, are we really making a difference? We get up in the morning, we put on our shoes, we go out to do this important work. And it's important for us to ask that question, are we really making a difference? Because as we invest our time, we want to know we're investing our time in the most beneficial way. As we invest the dollars and the resources that we get from our communities, from our funding partners, we want to be able to answer the question for them and let them know that we're making a difference and that that investment is actually creating positive change. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn how to ask and answer some really important questions in a methodical way. As Sarah said, I'm going to give you all kinds of information. You have your set of slides that has the same notes about the things I'm talking about. You have a handout that you can use as a worksheet with your board and your staff and your volunteers. And so I'm going to put a lot of things out there, ask questions as we go. And then as you back into your programs and start doing evaluation, if you have questions, absolutely time for you. So as I mentioned, right now I'm spending time as a professor at Trine University, and I just got a note on my screen that my internet's unstable. So let me know if for some reason I freeze up. So right now I'm teaching at Trine. I teach management, leadership, and marketing for students that are in the nonprofit and for-profit world. I've also spent some time as a community consultant as an executive director. And in all of those roles, I continually ask that question of myself when I invest my time, am I making a difference with the constituents that I serve? And in the programs and the projects that I've worked in, I bring people together to frame those to create those questions, and then frame a plan to get those questions answered with data. So what we're going to talk about today is the evaluation journey. First, some definitions about evaluation, and then why we evaluate. Then we're going to talk about stakeholders and who evaluates and who really cares about doing evaluation. So why is that important and who's important to? Then we're going to walk through the process, hardcore run through. So we're going to put our tennis shoes on. We're going to run through the whole process. And then, as I said, I'm happy to be a resource if you have questions about the content that I've shared. And then feel free to ask questions either on the chat that Sarah is managing, or raise your hands and Sarah will let me know if I'm not paying attention to hands, so that we can stop and have a conversation. So the basic definition of evaluation: a systematic method for collecting, analyzing, using information to answer questions and make decisions about projects, policies, programs, particularly about their effectiveness, whether or not they're doing what we want them to do, and efficiency. Are we using our resources the best way we can in order for us to create the changes that we're hoping to make? So evaluation helps us create a plan for determining, are we being effective and efficient with the resources that we're using? So some of the questions that we answer with evaluation: has this program made a difference? You learned about program development in your last webinar, and you talked about how to create a logic model to think about what is the change ultimately that we want to make with this program, and what is the process that we need to go through in order to bring our constituents together, create programs and services and outreaches and initiatives to help change behaviors, attitudes, conditions, knowledge, and status. And then what types of changes are we looking for in the short term, in the intermediate term, and then long term, that tell us that yes, we've created a positive change in this particular constituency. So evaluation answers the question: have we actually made a difference? Have we moved the needle for this particular group of people or this particular situation that we're trying to impact? Have we actually made a change that we can measure? And what is that needle? What exactly is it that we're trying to change? And how do we know whether or not we've actually made that change? We also answer the question: what has changed in individuals, in families or organizations or groups, or is the whole community as a result of the things that we're doing? So ultimately, what has been the impact of the work that we're doing on the groups, on all of the different groups and elements that we're trying to affect? And then, is this work fulfilling our mission? So each one of our organizations has a very specific purpose and mission that we're working to fulfill with every single thing that we do every day when we walk in the door. And so we can ask questions and answer questions to determine these particular things we're doing, are they leading to us doing what we said we would do in our mission statement? So we're going to continue to talk about our definition and walk through the different types of evaluation. So one type of evaluation is called a needs assessment, where we're evaluating what we need. We're assessing what we need, hence the name. So before a program begins, or as we're trying to determine whether or not we need to put together a program or an initiative, we ask about this problem that we're trying to solve, or the current state of this population or this environment. What is the current state? And what does it look like? So we try to define this problem or this need very, very completely. So we gather data about this need or problem. And then we think about ultimately, what do we want to change? What is that? What is the vision what's the future that we're envisioning for this particular group? And what does that look like? Or what does good look like? So we define that as well. And so the work we're doing is creating that change from where we are now to where we want to be with this particular issue or group. And in the middle, we also ask the question: what are the specific things that need to be done in order to create this change to get to good? And so we're asking questions about all of those things to determine whether or not we're going to make a commitment to create a program or create an initiative, whether or not we're going to ask other organizations, funders, for example, to make a commitment to us. So we can provide needs assessment data that says, here's the need, here's what we know about in other communities has been effective, and this is why we want to do this particular initiative or program. And so that needs assessment is the beginning of the evaluation that tells us this is where we're starting and this is where we want to go. Another type of evaluation is when we have a brand new program It's called a process evaluation. Once we build our program, we put it into place, we want to start collecting data immediately about all of the different things that we're doing to implement and operationalize this program. And we want to determine whether the program is operating the way we intended it to operate. Are we getting all of the people that we expected to, are we reaching all the people we expected to reach? Are we delivering all of the content or all of the activities that we intended to deliver? Are we getting the types of responses that we expected? And so as we're doing this process or implementation evaluation, we're determining whether or not things are going the way we planned on them to go as we wrote our grant proposal, as we created our logic model. And as we're doing this evaluation, we can ask ourselves, actually achieving the outcomes that we want to achieve. So that process evaluation helps us to make changes and adapt along the way to increase the quality and the possibility that our program is actually going to be effective. So going back to effectiveness and efficiency, this is where we start measuring from the outset, are we effective and are we efficient in what we're providing in this program or this initiative? And then as we have our program rolling and we have participants going through the program, or we're implementing it in a community multiple times, now we start to measure whether or not we have actually created the change that we wanted to create. Short term, within the first year, or maybe right after a program has been done. Intermediate term, which would be a year or two down the road as several different groups have gone through the program or participated. And then ultimately long term, 3 to 5 years, have we actually created a change in the community or in that constituency that we're working with? And so that's called outcome evaluation, where we're looking within the first 3 years primarily, and then ultimately, oops, I clicked the wrong button here. We have our impact evaluation, whether or not this work that we've done and putting these activities and processes into place, have we made an impact in the community or in the population that we've intended to serve? So our outcome evaluation is looking at individuals and small groups and whether or not we've seen changes in behaviors, attitudes, conditions, knowledge, and status. We're going to talk about that acronym BACS in a little bit. And then impact is overall, have we created change in the systems and in the population that we wanted to change? So as we are gathering data in our evaluation processes, we're building knowledge about the program, how it runs, how it works, what's effective, what's not. And so we're learning how to do it better every time we gather data and ask those questions about, is it working and what can we do differently? And are we creating the change that we intended to make? So as we think about program development, we have to think about evaluation from the very outset. What is it? What's the problem or the need right now? What is the ultimate outcome that we want to achieve, or the ultimate impact? And then how do we measure along the way to make sure that we're doing what we intend to do? So we want to make sure that we're aware of the program trap. So oftentimes we will be reading a newsletter from another organization, or we'll talk to another ED from another organization, or we'll go to a conference and someone will do this great presentation about this awesome program. It had these great impacts. We're like, oh, okay, we're going to get some grant money. We're going to put this program into place, and then we're going to solve it. We have to be careful that our evaluation and our intention is not program driven. Our intention has to be problem or need driven. And so we have to identify the problem or need, and I've already kind of said this a couple times, and what it is we want to change. And then we choose the activities, the programs, the strategies. Could be direct service programs, it could be marketing campaigns, it could be volunteer involvement, it could be all kinds of activities. All of those programs are what we want to evaluate relative to the problem and the future that we intend to create. So we're evaluating the programs on a larger scale. It's not just did the program work, it's did it create the change that we wanted it to make. So we think about evaluation oftentimes we'll hear evaluation and you have to create an evaluation plan in your grant proposal, and it's this big scary word. I'm so excited to see this big scary sunflower, but wait till you see the other sunflower, is even better. So if some people think of evaluation as a scary statistical analysis where you're looking at efficiency and value of an intervention, and you need to be able to use statistical software, and you need to have expertise, and you need to contract with some big mighty evaluation firm. That's not what evaluation is all the time. It can be, and there are some situations where we need to invest a whole lot in a large scale, deep evaluation. But as community organizations, what I want us to think about evaluation as is using words, stories, anecdotes, and numbers about your program and about your participants to discover what has changed because of what you're doing. So you make a plan to put your program into place, and you identify that data that you can collect along the way for process evaluation and for outcome and impact evaluation. You gather the data as you're implementing the program. You gather information from your participants. You tell the stories about what's working right now and what's not working, what needs to be tweaked. And so what we're doing is we're creating this story, this narrative that's backed up by data that tells us whether or not we're doing what we expected to do and what we need to change if that's not happening. So it doesn't need to be scary, but it needs to be intentional and methodical. So remember, intentional and methodical. So why do we evaluate? To gather knowledge about it, to make it better, to facilitate improvement, to provide evidence, not just to our organization, but to our stakeholders as well. Also to make judgments about it. If it's not going well, what do we need to do differently? Or should we even keep doing it? And then make decisions about its future. So make a note to yourself. Evaluation helps us do what's best to achieve our mission. So evaluation helps us achieve our mission. It's not something that is just an extra thing to put on your to-do list and do our work better. So don't be scared. Okay, so who evaluates? We can have an evaluator internally that is measuring our development and our implementation of our program. And so that can be anyone on your organizational staff. Generally, when you have a program, you'll have a program director, and either that person or a person that is designated by that person will have a matrix of the information that they want to collect. And I'll show you what that matrix looks like. And that person will collect data, or there will be different people that are involved with the program that will each be responsible for different pieces of data that they need to collect throughout the program lifecycle, and then report that data back, and then look at it in an analytical way and do some evaluating of that data to see what it's telling us about that program. So what are the positives of having an internal evaluator, having someone that's already working for your organization? You don't have to hire someone. Certainly you have to pay that person, but you don't have to hire someone new. They have access to your data. You don't have to figure out how to manage the security issues of providing data to an outside source. You define the scope of the evaluation. You design the evaluation yourself. That person or those people have institutional knowledge. So those insights and that history and the stories behind the data and the processes that you're doing, they understand that. And so it's not something that you need to provide insight into someone who's not familiar with your culture and the history of your organization. And as you're evaluating your program and the people who are running the program are gathering that evaluation data, they can be integrating their findings into practice. If they see there's something that's working really well, they can keep doing it. If they see something that needs to be tweaked, they can do it right away because they're already involved in that program implementation process. But on the flip side, if your staff is responsible for the evaluation piece of your program, that means that their time's going to have to be shared between all of the other things that they do, which is generally more than they can fit into a day, plus this new evaluation piece. So it's important to really think about the bandwidth issue and identifying a person who has the bandwidth to evaluate and gather that data in a way that's going to be beneficial to the organization. The learning curve, learning about evaluation itself, and then how to gather the data, and then how to use some spreadsheets, not super intensive evaluation tools, so that they can analyze the data and provide generalizations and insights about the data. There's also the issue of possible bias. We work in our organizations, we're passionate about our organizations, we believe we're doing good work. And so we have to be very careful that our opinion of what's happening and the way we gather the data and the way we interpret the data isn't driven by or isn't impacted by some of our biases, that because we love our program so much and we want to be successful. So now let's think about what would be the benefit of having, or the issues with, an external evaluator. So an external evaluator is an individual that could be a consultant that has a consulting firm, or it could be a researcher at a university. It could be a funder. One of your funders may say, we're going to provide your evaluation services for you as part of this grant. Or it could be a regulatory agency that wants to come in from the outside and spend some time examining how you're implementing and what the impacts are of your program. And so I've worked with all of these different types of evaluators, and it's so insightful to have someone come into your organization and look at it with completely objective eyes. At the same time, it's scary because sometimes we don't see the things that they see, and they bring some insights and they ask some questions that maybe we haven't asked before. But it is great to have that insight from the outside. And oftentimes there are grants and initiatives in communities where we can hire evaluators to help us understand our programs. So that's something I would definitely reach out to Sarah. If there's a program that you want to evaluate and you're not sure how to evaluate, there may be some tools and strategies and resources that the DECO Foundation can provide to help you determine whether an external evaluator would be something that would help strengthen your programs. So what are the pluses of an external evaluator? They give us that outside perspective. Their methods are going to be more sophisticated. It's their specialization. It's what they do. So they may be able to gather data differently. They may be able to analyze data differently to give you a broader or deeper level of insight than your staff may be able to. And then your staff's not responsible for doing that evaluation. So some of the negatives, cash outlay sometimes, or sometimes it's part of the grant, or you can get funding for an evaluator. Generally, the scope is limited to a specific program or program element that's either funded or sponsored by an outside agency, whereas an internal evaluator can maybe broaden it if you want to look at the bigger picture of the context. And so that scope is generally defined collaboratively between your organization, generally your director and program manager, and the evaluation organization. And so it takes time to have those conversations and define what it is we're actually measuring. Limited engagement, they come in and they leave. And so it's not something that you generally have an ongoing relationship with unless it's a long-term 2 or 3 or 4 year evaluation. So it's someone that isn't necessarily a resource that's going to be there all the time, but they do give you that insight, hardcore insight, pretty readily during their engagement with you. Because they don't understand your organization, they may miss some of the nuances and related growth or change that you've seen. And so it will be important for you to have someone available to kind of debrief and talk through that background and context information that will be important for them as they do their analysis and their interpretation of the data. So as I said, sometimes you can make the choice about internal or external evaluators. Sometimes your funding source will say, this is how we need you to evaluate. But you need to think about, what is it that we want to achieve? Do we have the bandwidth to do it internally? Do we want insights that maybe we're not prepared, or we're not trained to generate those insights? And just really think about what it is you want to learn from the evaluation. So who cares about evaluation? I know it sounds kind of tongue-in-cheek. Who cares about evaluation? Well, let's think about who would want to know about whether or not your program is making a difference. Well, certainly our organization would want to know if our program is making a difference, because we want to know whether we should keep doing it or maybe go in a different direction. And then also our clients are the beneficiaries, particularly folks who are decide they're going to want to know that it is effective before they get childcare, rearrange their calendars. So having efficacy data on your program can help them make a determination about whether or not they want to participate. Community stakeholders, whether it is a funding stakeholder or your local newspaper or your county whoever has a stake or an interest. So identifying who those stakeholders are is really important. Current future funders, of course, current funders, if they have provided you with resources to design and implement a program, they're going to want to know on a regular basis whether or not that the proposal that you sent is being implemented with fidelity and that the program is actually doing what you intended it to do. And then having that data to share with future funders is going to make it more likely for you to get funding if you can provide a history of being successful in designing and implementing programs for your community. So having that data and having snapshots of that data to share with funders is super, super valuable for your future growth and development as an organization.
Kelly,
yes.
I'm going to pop you to the chat.
Okay.
We had a comment in here by Tammy Stafford. She said one thing that she finds difficult is figuring out what to evaluate or to track.
We are going to see a big long list of things to track. So hang tight and we're going to get to that list. And you'll need to determine what is going to best measure a specific outcome that you're looking for. So thank you for asking that question. And that's what we're going to find out in just a few minutes. So then ultimately the field of impact, if, for example, you're in drug prevention or substance abuse prevention, if you find a program that works, that's part of my background is in substance abuse prevention. That's why I'm using that example. If you find a program that works, you'll want to share that information with the field so that if there are other communities and other organizations that are looking for a program that can positively impact a population in their community, you'll want to let them know, hey, this program worked. You'll want to be able to tell the story of the program and creating change if you have that data and you're able to tell that story more widely. And oftentimes you'll be telling that story in your grant reports. If, for example, you have state or federal funding for your programs, you'll provide a narrative of what's happening with your program. You'll provide that program outcome data and then your quantitative data as well. And oftentimes those agencies will create a larger picture of effective programs in different areas of community work. And oftentimes your program, if it's effective, can become part of that database. So providing that insight for others is super valuable as well. So you want to create a culture of evaluation. You want to continually ask, are we making a difference and how do we know? And then you evaluate. Then you share your findings. Then you become more transparent because you're telling your community and your constituency what you're doing and how it's going. That builds your legitimacy because people see you as an organization that has identified a need, created a program, implemented the program, and now you're actually making a difference. So now you're legit, you're making things happen, you're creating positive change. That gives you as an organization confidence to maybe take a little bit of risk, try something new, and you know how to evaluate, measure along the way whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, and maybe make some pretty significant impacts in your field of work. And as you're doing that and you're telling your story, you'll have funding organizations, community organizations, and networks in your sector saying, hey, how can we help or how can we work together so that we can even increase that positive change that can be made in communities. So evaluation can be a really great engine to make you a stronger organization and an organization that can make broader impacts. So what does evaluation look like? So here's our evaluation journey that we're going to walk through. We're going to talk about engaging stakeholders and then focusing the evaluation. and then describing the program, which you're familiar with if you attended the program development event last month. And then after you describe the program, build the program, then you start gathering evidence or data. You analyze the data, you draw conclusions about that data and what you found. Then you use those conclusions to make decisions about where to go next with your program or your initiative. And then you share the data and let folks know how it went. And then you start the cycle over again, engage your stakeholders, share the data with those stakeholders, tell them how they can continue to be involved, tell them what they can do next to help you grow. And you continue that cycle, that positive cycle of measuring your impact and continuing to make impact and making changes along the way whenever you find that things aren't going the way you intended them to go. So our first step, engaging stakeholders. So notice up in the corner, we have the slide from a couple slides ago. Here are stakeholders. So kind of keep in mind who our stakeholders are. So who do we need to get? It just sounded like an owl there. Who needs to be involved in the program? So who are the people in your organization that are responsible for program operations, for implementation? So identify the people who are closest to the program, that can get their hands on the data, that are participating with the program participants, and they're right on the ground, boots on the ground. So you definitely want to have at least one person who is implementing on your evaluation team. You want to think about who's affected by the program. Yes.
There's a couple comments saying that they're having a hard time with the collection of qualitative data versus quantitative data. So there's a couple comments on that.
Okay, so qualitative, so the stories, and we'll talk about stories and interviews and how to gather qualitative data. So that's going to be in our what do we measure and how do we collect it in just a few minutes. Thanks, Sarah. So we also want to think about who's affected by the program. Certainly our participants in our program, we want them to be involved with definitely providing program data. These are the people that we're going to interview. These are the people we're going to ask to do our surveys. And we're going to ask them to, as we pull our data together and start analyzing, we want them to be part of the conversation about, are we being effective and are we being efficient? And then also think about who's going to use that evaluation data. Certainly our internal folks are going to need to use it, but if there are funders that need to be involved, maybe one of our funders wants to be part of our evaluation team, maybe some community members who feel strongly about the work that we're doing, we may want them to be involved as well. So identifying the people who we want to participate in designing the evaluation, and then who we want to participate in gathering the data and analyzing and thinking about that data. And then why should they be involved? Why shouldn't it just be one person who says, I'm the evaluator and I'm going to take care of it all? Why do we want other people involved? It increases the credibility because it's not just one voice and it's not just one set of eyes. It involves more people with helping. So it allows us to collect more data. It engages advocates. As this group starts to learn about this program and its impacts, they can start talking about it out in the community because they understand it more deeply. And then it may help identify funding or authorization because we have people at the table that are gatekeepers for some resources that we may not know about. So super important to have a team of people on your evaluation, in your evaluation process, so that we can get these benefits more so than just having one person doing all the work. There will need to be one person, though, who is the manager of the evaluation plan and the manager of the evaluation process. And that's generally your program manager or your executive director. Okay, so notice you have a handout, and I don't know if you printed it out, but maybe make a note. On the first page, there is an area for brainstorming each one of the different steps. And so maybe put a star or maybe jot down some of the people that you've thought of that could be on your evaluation team for your programs. And continue to think about that. Maybe bring that to your staff meeting or your board meeting. And if you need to do an evaluation, say, who do we want to be at the table or who do we want to help with this, so that other folks can share their insights as well. So we start our evaluation by focusing with questions. So we have to, the first step after we decide who's going to be on the team, we bring the team together, someone gets out the chart paper and the markers, and we start asking ourselves, what do we want to know? What do we want to find out? And it's those questions that drive our data collection procedure. So questions such as, is the program reaching who we want to reach? And so we may ask that question, we may determine who is it that we're reaching right now, and is that the full target audience that we want to reach? Is it changing what we want to change? And so we'll have to identify what is it that we want to change, and what data can we use to create that change, to measure that change, and is it sustainable over time? Are we able to run this program with the resources that we have, and do we have some sort of a revenue generating engine that can ensure that we can sustain the program over time? So these are just some of the questions that we may want to ask. And if we say no to any of these questions, we need to determine, what do we need to change? And so figuring out kind of how to answer these questions is most important. And then what do we do if we don't get the answers that we want, or a positive answer to these? And then if we get a no to any of these questions, we also need to ask questions: should we keep doing the program, and why? Or should we stop doing the program, and why? And we're going to look at kind of at the end of the program about what are some specific things we can do once we get the answers to these questions, when we reflect when we do our analysis. So we focus with questions, and then again, on your handout, you may want to brainstorm, what questions do you want to answer? Also, you want to go back to, if you have a funder that is providing the resources for a particular program, and they have funding guidelines and they have reporting guidelines, you want to make sure that those reporting guidelines are included in the questions and the design of the evaluation. If there's specific data that your funder wants, make sure that's part of the evaluation plan, not just another reporting thing that you have to do for a funder, because you'll already be gathering data on this program. So it's most efficient to incorporate those external requirements into the overall evaluation plan, because it may answer some of your other questions as well. So do a scan of all of the information that you're required to collect for this program, plus any additional questions that you want to have answered, and then make a list of those questions. And then you determine how you're going to collect the data and what data you're going to collect. So you want to take a look at your program and describe your program. And so you want to describe your theory of change. What do you intend to change with your program, and what we believe about how change happens relative to this program and relative to the individuals and the groups and the community that we're trying to change. And I'm going to walk us through that with a diagram in just a minute. So when we're describing our program, we want to figure out, what do we believe about change? And then we're going to gather data to determine whether or not that change is happening. And then what information do we have to indicate whether or not that change happened? And that's where we identify the metrics. We identify the specific pieces of data that we're going to gather and how we're going to gather them. And then we think about our logic model as a part of this as well. It lays out the relationships between the need or the problem we've identified, the impact that we're looking for at the end of the program, and then the resources, activities, and that we're going to do to get the outputs and the outcomes that we want to get in order to make that impact. And so again, we're going to take a look at that in just a minute. And we also want to think about the assumptions that we're making throughout this whole process, and make sure that our assumptions are relevant and they're clear, and they're not sending us in a different direction than where we should be going. So let's think about our theory of change. We're still on the step of describing our program. So let's say, for example, that we have a problem or a need or an issue in a small rural community where we have teenagers that are getting in trouble, and they have a 45% recidivism rate. They continue to get in trouble, keep getting sent back to the probation department because they keep reoffending. So here's our problem or issue that we have in our community. And so we identify that we want to lower that recidivism rate. We want that 45% to be way less than that. We want the young people to choose behaviors and choose actions and have attitudes that keep them from reoffending. So we need to identify the strategies and activities that we're going to do that will reduce their reoffense rate by reducing the behaviors and the attitudes and the conditions that are leading to them reoffending, and then also increasing their knowledge of the benefits of not reoffending. So we have to create or identify those programs and strategies that are going to help us positively affect these young people. And so as we identify these programs, strategies, and activities, we hope that as we implement these programs, that we're going to get certain outputs. We're going to get changes in knowledge. They're going to know more about how to choose more beneficial or positive activities, changes in attitude. Students who don't want to be kids on probation, they want to be productive, participatory people in their community. That we have reductions in destructive behaviors. So our outputs are the things that we can measure after these students or these young people go through this particular program. And then ultimately outcomes that they're going to continue to not offend, and they're going to shift to kind of a different status of a young person, a person who's not involved with the juvenile justice system, but that they're a person that's involved more positively in the community. And then ultimately that number, that 45% over time, 3 to 5 years is what is kind of a benchmark. We see that number has changed significantly and measurably over time. So as we think about the strategies and activities and how they work, we want to measure how we're implementing those. Remember, in our process evaluation, we want to measure whether our teachers are trained well in the program. We want to measure whether our marketing and our recruiting for the program is done well. We want to make sure that our young people and their parents show up to the program. And so we're measuring all those things. That's collecting process data. And then we're going to pre and post test them, determine whether their level of knowledge has changed, determine whether they have attended regularly. And we asked a question about qualitative versus quantitative. We're going to interview them after the program and ask them, tell us about the things that have changed in your life because of this program. And we asked them to sign a paper saying that we can use their interview or their comments for our evaluation, or maybe for a narrative or a case study that we're going to do. So we simply have conversations and ask them person to person, what has changed in your life because of this program? And that qualitative data is super, super rich to share in your program reports to funders, in newspaper articles when you're talking about your successes, and then that pre and post test data, and then ultimately the number of students who are not on probation, and ultimately the percentage of students or young people who reoffend goes down. That numerical or quantitative data then reinforces those stories that you tell with those interviews and those surveys that you do with the individuals. So as we move through the theory of change, we're going from individual behaviors, knowledge, and attitudes to conditions and status of individuals and groups, to the condition of the community where we have a lower recidivism rate. So that's kind of the big picture of how we imagine or how we envision this program is going to change a particular population in our community, a particular condition in our community. So that's kind of that's why we've designed this program, or adopted a program that has this design, because we expect that this is what's going to happen. And so that's our theory of change. And so this is exactly what I just told you. I'm just going to show you what the theory of change would look like. And you have a theory of change in your Word document that Sarah sent to you, that you should walk through this process, and this will help you to design your evaluation data. So our problem is youth are engaged in high risk and criminal activity. 45% of them reoffend. And right now there's not a program or a structure that can help them build life skills so that they can do something other than get in trouble in the community. So some of our strategies, we've got collaboration in our community. So that's one of the things we're going to do, to build this collaborative relationship, this network, this web of support for our young people. And so if we do that, we'll have monthly collaboration and planning meetings. That's an output. So that's something we can measure. Our outcomes: improved communication between our schools, our probation department, our law enforcement, our judges. And so that increases accountability. And so that's one of the strategies we're going to do for this program. And so we can measure the outputs. How many meetings do we have? How many people participated? And the outcomes, we'll ask our participants to share some comments with us on a survey, or we'll interview them. Again, that qualitative plus the quantitative of how many people are showing up. every month, that gives us a picture of, is our collaboration in that particular system increasing? So that's one of our strategies that we would measure. And then another strategy, we adopt the Positive Steps program. So it's a family strengthening program where students or young people and their parents each come to class for 8 weeks. And so we need to train community facilitators to run that program. So we're going to have this annual, so an output is that we have an annual training and we have a critical mass of facilitators that show up and participate. And so now we've got this cadre of skilled caring adults in the community that are going to be available as a resource to these families even after they participate. So that's another set of strategies. So we measure how many people showed up to the training, how many hours that training was. And then now our outcome is we've got this new core of support that we didn't have before. So if we look at our problem or issue, no program or structure to help them build skills. So now we've got this new support network that we're starting that aren't people in the probation, they're not probation officers, they're people who just simply care. So what are our next set of strategies? Teaching youth respect and responsibility and teaching parents how to reinforce respect and responsibility behavior. So that's the implementation of the program. So we've got our 6 program cycles serving 60 youth and their parents. And so we're going to measure that output. Hopefully the outcome is that we do a post-test and the students learn and demonstrate respect and responsibility, and parents hold youth accountable. So we're going to do our pre and post test, but also our parents and our youth are going to report out during our conversations and our activities during the program. We can gather that qualitative data again to tell our story about whether or not the program is effective. And then ultimately, all of these things together that we've gathered all of this process data on and this short-term outcome data on will lead to a decrease in youth recidivism and a decrease in high-risk behavior and hopefully an increase in youth assets in our community. And so as we think this through, each one of these points in the outputs column, the outcomes column, is a place where we can gather data that answers the question, is our program effective and efficient? Is our program achieving what we want it to achieve? And should we continue to run this program based on what we're seeing in this data? Questions? Okay, I'm looking at my watch, going really fast. Got 15 more minutes to cram the rest of it in. So this is your, you have one of these in your handout. Try making a theory of change and identify your problem and the strategies and activities. And then think about short term, what's going to change, intermediate term in the first year or two, what's going to change, and then ultimately, what do you want to change in a system or in a population that, that is going to directly address this problem that you have identified. So what data should we use and where do we find this data? So output measures, so backing up, outputs are those things that we should see immediately after we interface with that population, immediately after the program is over, within the first year. These are the things we should look for. And then our outcome data we should see within the first 1 to 3 years that we start to see with groups of people who we have provided services for or who have been involved in our initiatives. So outputs are going to be the light peach and then outcomes are going to be the yellow. So what we want to do is we want to look at the number of things that we're doing, who we reach, and their level of satisfaction. So the number of volunteers, number of families, number of people attending, conference participants, how many flyers we've distributed, how many program sessions. We can measure marketing, we can measure participation of network partners, reach and scope of media. So these are numerical data on the things that we do every day relative to this particular program. And then we can do surveys. We can either do like Likert scale surveys where people rate things, or we can have surveys where they're demonstrating their knowledge in different areas. Also satisfaction, ask people what they liked, what they didn't like, what they think should be changed. And then interviews during the program, or you can do before and after surveys or interviews, conversations. But as I mentioned before, always make sure if you're going to use someone's story that you get their permission and have signed permission to use their story with their name or without their name, because there may be someone out in the community that could recognize the context of that story, and you want to make sure that you protect your participants. So interviews are great qualitative data. Pictures are great qualitative data to tell the story, maybe create a storyboard. Videos are great ways, particularly on social media, to tell the story. And you can use those things as reinforcement of the numbers that you're seeing of the success of your programs. So outcome measures, what we're trying to determine with outcome measures is, has the client's situation changed, or the participant? And so we want to measure how participants have changed because of our work. And so I've said BACKS, behaviors, attitudes, conditions, knowledge, and status, a number of times. I just love that framework because it helps us to think about, what are we looking for in terms of change? So are we looking for something that a client is doing differently because of the program? Smoking versus not smoking, breaking the law or not breaking the law, showing up for school or not showing up for school. So this could be observation or self-report on a survey or interview, or it could be that you're simply tallying or counting behaviors. Attitudes, how are clients or constituents thinking differently about the program? And so a lot of times we'll do a pre and post test where we will ask about how someone feels or thinks about a particular issue and ask them to explain, or they may rate their agreement or disagreement with a particular idea. And so that can tell us what attitudes are before and after a program or an initiative. Or we can look at observations of how many people are being more friendly or being more positive or getting more involved, and that can demonstrate some attitudes. And then conditions tend to be outcomes closest to the impact side of the evaluation. What's different about the overall environment that we're working in? Percentage of recidivism, percentage of smoke-free restaurants with, or places with smoke-free air. And I know that everyone's pretty much smoke-free now, but that was kind of one of the things that I was measuring. The percentage of pollution, or percentage of people who litter. And so conditions are the percent of change that you can measure of that condition that was originally the problem. And then knowledge, new knowledge, so pre and post test, or asking people, what do you understand now that you didn't understand before, before you participated? And then finally, status. Status and condition are kind of similar. So status would be employed versus non-employed, smoker versus non-smoker, overweight versus not overweight. So status is for an individual, and condition would be for a population of that same aspect or that same metric. So status is how many people have this particular condition or this particular situation, versus condition is what percentage of the population has this particular situation. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so some example outcome measures of how participants have changed. So some behavior measures: community volunteers demonstrating engagement, number of agencies participating, number engaging in reoffending behavior, the number demonstrating respect and responsibility. Things that we can see would be behaviors, and we would count those numbers. Attitudes. Majority of community members support increased patrols. We do a poll. We put a poll on Facebook. How many of you would support this particular thing? That would be an attitude. Desire to be proactive in helping youth change behavior. Again, doing a polar survey to see how people feel about supporting youth. Desire to do the right thing rather than the wrong thing. Asking youth participating in a program, has your attitude changed about what you're going to do with your free time? Conditions: invasive plant species are less concentrated if you're in a naturalist or environmental organization, percentage of obese adults in the community, percentage of reoffending youth. Knowledge, percentage of people that pass the I-STEP test, increased understanding of respect on post-test scores. And then finally, status: clean air policy is adopted, low-income families have a positive bank balance, off probation or back in school, or funds have been raised to restore 2 buildings. Each one of these outcome measures can be defined with data. They can be measured with data. And so thinking about what behavior, what attitude, what condition, what set of knowledge or piece of knowledge, or what status will show us that we have actually addressed that problem or addressed that need that we identified in our community or in this particular population. So where do we find this data? Organizational records. Generally, output data is where you're going to find your numbers of participants, your level of participation, the number of programs you have run, the amount of media coverage, the amount of marketing and promotion you have done. So everything you do day to day, count it. Even if you don't need it for this evaluation for this program, count it anyway, because you can use that data as part of your needs assessment to try to get support for a future program. Right now, we're only able to do this level of programming with our resources. If we had more resources, we could jump to this level. So everything you do, I know it seems like it's a pain in the neck to count everything and record everything, but if you can just have every person that's involved with the program, just keep a tally, keep a spreadsheet of the stuff that they do, maybe on Fridays, have them count it up and put it in a shared drive, then you've got that data and you can use it to answer all kinds of questions while you're identifying needs, designing programs, and measuring programs over time. Outcome data, you gather it from your programs as you're running your programs and people are finishing up and you're measuring where they've come from the beginning to the end. Local data from your partners who also serve that particular constituency, and you have to make a promise with them, and oftentimes you'll have to sign an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, saying if you give us this data, we understand that it's certainly they're going to give it to you confidential and anonymous data, but make an agreement about how you're going to protect them if they give you their data. And then also publish sets of data. And here are a lot of different websites that you can go to get, it's not necessarily the most current data. Generally, there's a lag of a year or more in the data, but try to find, when you're looking at data for a needs assessment, if you're looking at how to measure change over time, you want to find at least 3 years of the most recent data that's available for you. And then you should use that to measure your outcomes, with the realization that if you do a program this year, if you get last year's data from one of these databases, it's not going to tell you whether anything's changed. It will tell you your baseline or where you've started. And then you'll need to then continue to follow up over time to see if that needle has moved. So sometimes it's going to take a little bit of time because of that lag to see if you've moved the needle, which is why you want to really work on sustainability and keeping that program running for multiple years so you can see if you've actually made that impact. Okay, so you've got some more practice about identifying the output measures that you would use and the outcome measures that you could use to measure a particular outcome impact of your program. So we're not going to walk through the whole logic model because you talked about this in your last program, but this is how we would lay out, we would take that theory of change and we would lay out how we would measure our short-term, our medium-term, and our long-term impacts or effects, effects of our program. And so it has everything we've talked about is laid out here. And then for each one of these little chunks of words on the outcomes, that's going to be a different piece of data that you're going to gather repeatedly over time to determine whether or not your program's making an impact. And so just kind of made a little graphic here to kind of show you what you're looking for. And so how do we gather this data? And this is kind of a map to show you how to gather the data. The outcome statements that are going to define why you're gathering the data that you're gathering and what it's going to tell you. So for example, volunteer and staff will complete and pilot a training by December, and hopefully we'll have 25 of the volunteers and agency staff will participate in the training. And how are we going to measure that? With attendance and observation data. So what else? What are other outcomes we hope to achieve? County agencies will increase collaboration to address recidivism by the end of this year. And we're going to measure that by how many of them enter a memorandum of understanding. And hopefully we'll have 4 agencies by the end of this year that are actually going to do this. And so our dates are a little bit off. Youth participants, we want them to increase knowledge of respect and responsibility by the end of the program, measured by pre and post test data. Parents, again, increasing their knowledge of reinforcing respect and responsibility by the end of the program cycle, again, pre and post test. And then we want our youth participants to maintain the desire to do the right thing to do. And we're going to call and interview them on the phone to see whether or not they're still making good choices. Hopefully 85% of them are going to continue to maintain that level of respect, responsibility, and making good choices. So there's an opportunity for you to practice this and write out some outcome statements, which you can use in your grant proposals and in your program descriptions. And so we're not going to read through these. This is essentially what I just said, your outcome statements that will define what it is you're trying to achieve and what it is you're measuring in terms of program effectiveness, efficiency, and impact. So as you think about the data that you're going to gather, you want to think about who's going to gather it, how they're going to gather it, how often they're going to gather it, and then how they're going to format and transmit this data. And so just kind of walking through our MOUs, we're going to gather every January and put it in PDFs. The training, we're going to make a spreadsheet of all the people who have attended and make notes on attendance and participation. Weekly enrollment data for our program participants in a spreadsheet. And then persistence, we're going to have a spreadsheet of who we've interviewed, put the comments in the spreadsheet and keep that in a file. And then sustainability, we're going to make sure we're going to continue to raise funds for our program, write grants for our program, and we're going to keep that data in our software program. And then we'll work with our probation staff to get our reoffending percentage every January to see if that has changed over time. And high-risk behavior, we're going to go to our schools to see if our students have been expelled or suspended, and we're going to gather that data every January. So this is how you keep track of who's gathering what and where they put it. And then the evaluation manager should be responsible for keeping this updated and then holding folks accountable for what they're gathering. And then as we take a look at the data, let's see what our target was. 4 agencies signed MOUs. Okay, all of them signed it. In our positive steps training, we wanted 25 people trained. Well, we had 17 people trained, and we had 85% increases in youth and parent participants. No, 85% increases in our pilot group that we ran. Our program participation, we only had 39 families. We were hoping for 60. Pre and post data, well, we had 45% youth increase their pre and post performance in their first 2 cycles. Parents increased their attitudes and knowledge a whole lot more than the youth did. And then as we did our phone interviews, 65% of youth persisted over the 6-month period, 50% 12 months. And then our parents, about 50%, 40%. We were only 85% funded in our past year. Our recidivism, we wanted it to decrease 10%. It decreased 2% in our recidivism decreased 2%, and our high-risk behavior in schools decreased 3%. So here's our data. And so now, and I'm looking at, I know it's 10:01, I'm gonna hurry up. So what questions do we want to answer? Is the program reaching who we wanted to reach? Well, 39 out of 60 families. Is it changing what we wanted to change? Well, pre and post, we've had an increase of 45% youth, 85% parents, increase in persistence of youth and parents, a decrease in recidivism and high-risk behavior, not the level that we were hoping for in the first 2 years of the program, but we're seeing positive change. And is it sustainable over time? It's 85% funded, so it's close. So if we think about whether or not we have achieved what we wanted to achieve, to some extent, we're getting there. Should we keep doing the program or should we stop doing the program? Well, here's what we have to decide. Based on that data, do we want to roll on, keep everything as it is and maybe expand it? Well, we're getting some positive results, so maybe we want to keep everything as is. Revise it and reboot it, maybe increase the marketing, maybe check on how we're implementing the program, maybe do some retraining of our teachers. Rehome, maybe we want someone else to implement it, or maybe we want to retire it. So we have to decide what it is we want to do based on the impacts that we have, based on the evaluation data that we've collected. And this is something that you sit down with your board with, you share the data with them. This is what we hoped we would. Here are our options. Team, what are your next steps for your evaluation? And so you want to think about what resources we put in, what outputs we're getting, and what outcomes we're getting, and determine whether you're making enough you have enough positive momentum to keep moving forward, and what needs to change in order to continue to be successful. So share the data with as many people as you can if it's successful data. If it's not successful data, you can share that you did the program and share what you're going to do in the future to make it even more successful. Success stories can use all of the data that you have provided. You have releases from people. You want to talk about opportunities for growth. If you want to grow the program, who can be involved, who can help you grow the program, ask for referrals, welcome people to collaborate with you. You want to provide an authentic account of what you did, why you did it, what happened, and how it changed your community, and tell that story in whatever channels you have available, and equip your board members, equip your staff folks to tell the story using the data, and make sure that the story is consistent over all of your channels and all of your people. So where we have been, we've engaged our stakeholders, we've focused the evaluation, we described the program with our theory of change and our logic model. We've learned where to find data and how to gather it. We've analyzed the data to determine whether or not it's working, and what we want to do next. Now we make the decision, and then we share the data, and then continue to engage the stakeholders to continue running the program or move it to another stakeholder. So with that, I know we have gone over by 4 minutes, but I am happy to answer questions.
Kelly, thank you so much. Kelly's been kind enough to say that she'll share her email that we can send out with the video if you guys have direct questions that you want to send to her. We knew it was a lot of information today, but there's just so much with this topic that we wanted to share with you as much as we could. So please don't hesitate to reach out with myself or Margarita or Kelly for any further questions, but we'll get these resources back to you as well after this session. And again, if you could just remember to fill out the survey, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great spring.